Running our businesses fills our days. Brian Rogers is a business attorney who focuses on helping clients buy and sell small businesses. He also counsels clients on setting up new companies, particularly as it relates to names, which also means he navigates trademark law pretty effectively to keep his clients from inadvertently running afoul of others' trademarks, right? Brian's going to share contract hygiene with us this morning that'll help make running our businesses better. So e4e, please welcome Brian Rogers. E4e needs to start with a disclaimer, so here we go. I want to make sure that we've got one up here before Brian talks to us.
Thanks, Steve. This is Steve's disclaimer. I love the end of it, though. By continuing to attend the event, you acknowledge that you have read or skimmed, understood, or pretended to understand those terms. So I'll let the show begin. That's great, Steve. I did, he wasn't sure that I'd come with an appropriate disclaimer, so he wanted to make sure I was covered. I do have one at the end, so I guess by the time you get to mine, it's too late anyway. Okay, contract hygiene. Okay, what is hygiene? Conditions or practices to serve, or that serve to promote or preserve health. So we all understand hygiene, right? I was at I think it was Missouri Venture Forum meeting years and years ago. That gave me the idea for a blog post. It was one of my first blog posts on my Contracts Guide blog called Contract Hygiene. And the presenter had invented some technology to monitor hand washing adherence in restaurants. And anyway, he came with this stat that as few as 50% of restaurant workers wash their hands, which was a little scary. But hand washing, it's simple, it's inexpensive, practically free, and it's very effective, yet 50% of, I don't know, I find that hard to believe. I hope that's not right. I'm going to start cooking more, but anyway, being the contract, I don't know, nerd, geek that I am, I started thinking, that sounds kind of familiar, you know, contracts and contract hygiene. You know, simple, I go back too far. Simple practices, procedures that we tend to disregard when we're dealing with contracts in our businesses that are inexpensive, and we just don't do it. It would be very effective if we did. So we're going to talk about a few of those. So contracts are absolutely everywhere. I mean, everywhere you go, you're entering into contracts. I mean, from buying office supplies to you know, just anything you do, basically. It's not just the copier maintenance agreement or things where you're actually signing on the dotted line, but contracts are everywhere. And so it's something that as business owners we're dealing with constantly in day-to-day business. So we're going to talk about five tips, 5 habits that can help improve your contract hygiene. So the first is to negotiate before you sign. Give important contracts special attention. Not all contracts are of the same importance. Don't sign the other side's terms and conditions, and of course I'll explain that a little bit more later. Send your own terms and conditions and make sure that the other side is aware of important small print terms. So we'll start with negotiating before you sign. So every contract has business and legal risks. That's just the way, it's the world we live in. You know, you enter into a business relationship with someone, the business, you know, what you're trying to do might or might not go well. It might present possible legal exposure. I like to sometimes tell people that what I do is to help people keep time bombs out of their filing cabinets. So now we don't have filing cabinets anymore, and you know, it's kind of an old-timey time bomb. Although I did bring some artwork. Some people, no stick figures today, but some original artwork, such as it is. So, you know, you sign a contract, you enter into an agreement even if you don't realize you've signed a contract, and you stick it in your filing cabinet and it's just sitting there ready to go off and blow up your business. So that's what I do as a lawyer who deals with contracts is to help people avoid that situation. So, now one thing that particularly maybe new business people don't always appreciate is the business world is different than the consumer world in that contracts are generally negotiable. Just because someone gives you a contract, even if it's in a PDF, they send it DocuSign, whatever, and make you feel like you just have to sign it and there's nothing you can do about it, contracts are often negotiable. And, unlike consumer contracts. And so I would encourage you as the first hygiene tip, don't just accept what your business partners or, people that you do business with, it might be a lease, it might be a contract to buy stuff from them. Don't necessarily just accept that these are the terms. Read the contract and think about whether you should negotiate a few things. It doesn't mean you need to lawyer it. You don't have to call me necessarily, although, it's not a bad idea in a lot of cases. So, but, pay attention to your contracts and be ready to negotiate them. I missed the last point there. Bargaining power obviously is important. I mean, if you have no leverage whatsoever, you're not likely to make any changes. For instance, if you want to use, Facebook, they're not going to let you mark up the little user agreement and sign that. But anyway, bargaining leverage is important. You might not have any leverage, but at least think about, should I be negotiating something? So, and tip number 2, hygiene tip number 2, give important contracts special attention. Now, when I took this picture of this important contract, I didn't focus in close enough so you can see the words. So, but just take my word for it. This is a very, very important contract. So it needs special attention. So, in order to evaluate whether a contract needs more attention, think about the amount of money involved. If it's something for $100, it's probably not worth a lot of time to review and to negotiate. But if it's critical to your business, even if it's not a high valuable contract as far as dollar amount, if that service goes out and you can no longer serve your customers and your business shuts down, maybe you should look at that contract. And then there might be heightened legal or business risk. In that circumstance, you might want to spend more time on it. So here's some types of contracts that might require special attention. If you have an online business, you're selling, you've got an online platform that you've got subscribers and whatever, and you hire a web developer to build that website, that's a pretty important contract. I mean, if that doesn't go right, then your business is done. So that's one that maybe you would want to spend more time with. If you have a contract that with a very important customer, that might be one that you want to spend more time with because that customer is so important to your business. Supply agreements for a critical component. You make and sell widgets, and this one little spring or whatever is really important. You might want to make sure that you've got a good supply of that and that you pay more attention and that sort of. And then services agreement where there's potential for a lot of liability. Sometimes contracts aren't really a high value contract, but there's a lot of potential legal liability. I mean, you could think products liability or other things where you get paid $1 to sell something, and I don't know, it explodes and kills somebody. That's kind of a big thing. So if your business has that kind of risk, or a particular business arrangement with someone has that kind of risk, then you should probably spend more time on it. So, and then tip number 3, don't sign the other side's terms and conditions. So what am I talking about with terms and conditions? So with, under basic contract law, a contract is formed when there's an offer, there's an acceptance, and both sides basically give something of value. So for instance, let's say I've got a kayak that I want to sell, and I say to Steve, I'll sell you my kayak for $400 on Tuesday and come pick it up and pay cash. So that's an offer. He says, sure, because he knows my kayak is worth way more than $400 and he's getting a steal. So when he says sure, we've got a contract. I made an offer, acceptance, both of us are giving something, so I've got to be ready with my contract. He's got to be, show up to pick it up on Tuesday with cash in hand. So the gold standard for contract formation is negotiate it all. I mean, have a full contract with your full understanding and sign it. That way everybody knows what the agreement is and it's clear that both sides have agreed to it. Now, most business doesn't happen that way. I mean, if you thought about all the different types of contracts that your company is a party to, how many of them have you actually signed or gone through that sort of process or negotiation process? Probably not very many. So this is more typical. It's the terms and conditions, and this is actually an actual legal document that I kind of shrunk. Hide the Ball Inc. It wasn't actually my client. I disguised their name for confidentiality reasons. But so 29 paragraphs of legal fun that that this particular company sends out with all of its quotes, basically, purporting to be the contract. So the typical scenario here, instead of signing a contract, one side maybe sends out a purchase order in an email with these attached, or maybe a link to a page on a website saying these are our terms and conditions. The other side, I send that to Steve with my terms and conditions. He responds sure with his terms and conditions, and of course they don't say the same thing, right? So I'm purporting to control the contract terms, and he's trying to do the same. But since we don't have a contract, we don't really know what the contract's going to be. So I don't want to be on the hook after he foolishly tips the kayak over in the river and drowns. I don't want to be responsible, Steve, I'm sorry. So I give him a limited 1-year warranty in my terms, and he knows that my kayak might be kind of leaky, so he wants a more full warranty and merchantability, which basically means it's a decent kayak. So I'm sending terms that say one thing, he's responding with terms that say the other. We're not signing a contract. So what's the contract? This is a situation that's known as the Battle of the Forms. And so we've got two forms that are battling it out. The law just throws in a blender, and you don't know. The situation's really kind of a black box. You don't know what the contract is until it's gone wrong. Steve's estate is suing me, and then the court says, well, this is your contract. You just don't know until the end. But if you sign the other side's document, it's going to be much more likely that their terms are going to control. So just because I send my purchase order or whatever to Steve with a sign here, when he signs that, he's really hurting himself in the Battle of the Forms. And so in that kind of a situation, if you can avoid signing the other side's form, then that would definitely be good, because you don't know what the contract terms are, but you do know that if you sign the other side's form, it's a lot more likely that theirs are going to govern the contract. And their terms are not going to be nearly as good as whatever your terms are. And then this is kind of a corollary to that. It's similar, but it's a battle of the forms. If one side puts their form document in play and you don't, then you're obviously going to be disadvantaged, because when the contract terms get thrown into that blender, it's only their terms that are there, and yours aren't going to be there to counteract them. So be sure to send your terms and conditions also. Okay. And that's bad hygiene, of course. And then this one won't apply to as many situations, but if your agreements, say with your contracts or your customers, have kind of what I would call small print terms, I could see say Richard with his customers, I don't know how he you know, his process for having his customers sign his contracts or whatever, but he does, you know, kitchen remodels. And so I'm sure he's got some disclaimers in there, some limitations and liability and that sort of thing. If something is important like that, and here's some examples, let's see. Yeah, limitations of liability, indemnification. If your contract has those sorts of terms in there, particularly when you're consumer facing and you know you're doing business with consumers, if those terms are hidden in your contract, then a court may not enforce them, even if they're there. And so the concept to think about is unfair surprise. You know, would your customer have expected that kind of limitation, and would it be unfair for them to be bound by something that you hid, an important term that you hid in your contract? So I'm sure you've all seen, you know, you're reading through a contract, you know, before you go to bed, like I like to do for fun. and you see all this, like, all caps term or something. I had a client once that the other side sent back a contract with a paragraph with all caps in it, and he was offended because he thought they were yelling, which was kind of funny. So, you know, some terms tend to be in all caps to point it out, you know, to make sure, because it's one of those terms that a court may not. So you can put them in bold, you can sometimes maybe have your customer initial those terms, you know, something to make sure that the process is fair and that they, you know, it's clear that they at least should have known that term was there. So anyway, in conclusion, wash your hands. And of course, you know, pay attention to your contract hygiene. So, any questions?
When I work with a client and I do a project, I usually, instead of a contract, I have a letter of agreement that they sign. What are your thoughts on contract versus agreement? Is it the same thing, or?
Yeah, it's just a different presentation. So, I mean, if your letter agreement, and I do the same, yeah, my client contracts are letters also. So it's just a more kind of informal way of kind of organizing a contract.
It seems less scary.
Yeah. No, it's definitely more personal, and less, I don't know, it just seems less formal. So. Yes, sir.
Two areas, I know you could comment on these, but maybe in brief. Two areas that I run into all the time are arbitration provisions in boilerplate. This is in boilerplate that comes back. Arbitration provisions and award of attorney's fees in the event of a dispute. Those two things. And my experience has been that clients, unless they've been through arbitration, they know nothing about it. They have no idea what's going on there. And attorney's fees, on the face of it, yeah, maybe so, yeah. Somebody sues me and it's outrageous, you know, I'd like to get my attorney's fees reimbursed, not realizing that it's back and forth. And so, can you comment on your experience with those types of things?
Yeah, arbitration is interesting because in 2011, I think, the Supreme Court decided they love arbitration. And there was just an avalanche of litigation after that, where the Supreme Court, lower courts were overturning a bunch of arbitration cases because historically, state courts have not liked arbitration, so there's real bias against it. And then suddenly there's this huge bias for it. As far as, I was trained not to like arbitration, because of the early work I did as an attorney. In theory, it should be quicker and less expensive, and it's definitive because you can almost never get an arbitration award overturned on the merits. So, but I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I have a personal bias against it. But I think it has maybe more to do with, and I've talked to a lot of attorneys over the years, do you like it, do you not like it? And I have no consensus. So,
I've never found a real fan of it.
yeah, there's definitely horror stories, and it's expensive, because unlike litigation, in arbitration, you pay the court. So you're paying the arbitrator at least as much as each side's paying their attorney, and it's expensive, so. As far as attorney fees, you know, the default is, in most states, definitely in Missouri, is what they call the American rule. And that means that each side, win or lose, pays your own attorney. And I've had a lot of unfortunate conversations or sad conversations with clients where they, you know, the other side of a contract has clearly breached the contract, and they're trying to decide whether to sue or not, and they ultimately decide not to because it'll cost, say, $10,000 to, you know, in attorney fees to bring the case, and there might be $20,000 or $30,000 at risk. And so if you can shift the fees in what's known as a prevailing party attorney fee provision, where whoever wins pays the other side's attorneys, I encourage all of my sell side, if you're selling something, to do a presentation called Getting Paid, and that's one of the important aspects, contracting aspects of making sure that you can get paid by your customers if you're spending trade credit, is to make sure that you've got an attorney fees provision in there. So, but anyway.
A professional liability carrier requires me to use their contract form or submit my own form, and they review and edit.
Yeah,
So
sounds like a fun process.
I got a standard form that they've blessed, which includes a provision for mediation. Last month, the county government contacted me, wanted to hire me, asked for a proposal, did the proposal, submitted the proposal. They accepted everything except they wanted to attach the county's terms and conditions.
Of course they did.
Okay.
Well, that's
My
just
choice
changed
is
the whole contract.
Do the job, take the money, and hope everything goes well,
Yeah.
or say, no, thank you, and look elsewhere for work.
Right.
So, I've worked for this particular county for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem with it.
Yeah.
The contract, both mine and their terms and conditions, require me to have professional liability insurance.
Right.
My insurance carrier says, we may not cover you if you don't use the contract form that we blessed.
Right.
I'd find
Can I
another- I'd find-
rely on the mediation term to
I'd-
get everybody around the table and discuss a dispute?
I'd find another liability insurance carrier.
Yeah, or
I've had 4
If
over
it's
the
a-
last, 32 years. All of them required that.
See,
All 4.
mine does not.
No?
Mine does not. Mhm.
if it's an important contract, I often send contracts to insurance carriers to look at, and encourage my clients to. I mean, there's something known as contract liability. If you take on liability in your contract with somebody that you wouldn't have had under tort law, that's called contract liability. It's often excluded from general liability policies. And so if there are any sorts of provisions like that in a contract, I always recommend that my clients send them to the insurance carrier to look at, make sure that there are contract liability problems. I would, with such an important contract, try to get that contract blessed by the carrier if you could. So, but anyway, my time is up, so I don't want to get the hook. Steve.